We are live straight away. I didn't count yet.
Okay.
Hi,
Fine.
everyone. We are joining you tonight on Facebook and YouTube. We're doing both streams tonight because we want as many people to be able to come and listen to our guest Nemo as possible. Tonight is Wednesday, the 6th of October already.
Well done, Jane. Well done.
I know I remember the date. It's all happening tonight. And so we are welcome to 21st Century Saints. We're a podcast and live stream series for members of the church or those affiliated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints here in the United Kingdom and around the world. Welcome to this episode that we have been hoping to organise for such a long time now, because we want to take a deep dive with everyone's most loved Mormon, Nemo. We have Nemo the
Hello.
Mormon. Do you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. Doug Vincent's in the room already. Excellent. Nice to see you again, Doug.
Doug and Sarah. Well. So Nemo comes with his own entourage. He has so many in the audience. Everyone just loves him, and it's wonderful. We love it. So for those who are just joining us for the first time, I'm your host, Jane Christie. I'm the active Mormon in the bunch. We have our co-host Alana Wilson-Bryce.
Is the rebel.
The rebel.
Rebels in the house.
Yeah. Is there anything that we want to say before we... Yeah, if you want to share this out anywhere, if you want to like and subscribe, that would be great for helping to get the word out about what we're doing. We would really appreciate that. Do it.
Your feed will be a better place for it, I think.
Joy. Okay, we're going to jump right in tonight. Let's talk about this past weekend. Have you been busy this weekend, Nemo the Mormon?
Yeah, conference weekend is busier now for me than when I was when I was fully immersed in the truth claims of the church. It is now the busiest time of year for me by far. I watch conference so other people don't have to. Essentially, that's kind of what I do. I figured that there's a lot of people that aren't comfortable watching conference but still want to know what their believing family and friends are being told. A lot of what I do is because I have believing family and friends. And when I say believing, that's not to say that I'm not a member of the church or anything like that. It's just that they are what you would class as traditionally Orthodox believing. So I use the kind of the position I'm in to help them as best I can. So yeah, conference weekend's very busy. I do the halftime shows. Had Peter Bleakley on and a guest, Doug. And then I also had Priesthood Dispatches for his first time on the halftime show. And it was awesome. And I'm exclusive right here. I'm thinking of trying to do 5 halftime shows in April, seeing if I can get enough people together to do one after every session. It will be absolutely draining. I'll take time off work for it, but that's the plan. Yeah.
Well, what's conference?
Alana will always bring us back to reality and remind us that so general conference, if you are a member of the LDS church, you know that we have conference every 6 months. It lasts pretty much the whole weekend over there's like 5 sessions. And it can be super, Alana, how would you describe it?
Boring. Can I just say, Jane has turned me into a complete feminist. We need more women speakers.
Hey, we got double the amount we had in April.
Yeah, what was it, 4, 5? I think I seen somebody posted. I think it was Deborah. That had posted the thing, and she wasn't very happy about it. And I'm like,
4 women
we
speaking.
need more women.
Yeah, 3 prayers from women.
Deborah has been doing some great work in the world of Facebook. She's a UK Latter-day Saint who is just doing fantastic work, speaking about things that are a little bit painful. And one of the things that she'd mentioned earlier on today was that, we still don't have a lot of we, in fact, I think it's kind of underselling it to say we don't have a lot of female voices. It's been shocking in previous years,
Poor.
and women are crying out for that.
Very
You
poor.
can't be what you can't see. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, as Doug says, two better than last time. So that's what conference is. That's what's happening in it. For me, it can be wonderful. However, it can also be more often extremely painful. And when you're watching conference through the lens of someone who is experiencing pain or has maybe questions that are it's just not hitting where you needed it to hit. I often describe it as the spiritual equivalent of asking for bread and receiving a stone. So we'll get wonderful talks this year about mental health. That was exceptional. We've had some really, really good stuff, but then we'll get talks about sad heaven and how just wishing your family are going to be together forever won't make it so, and things that carry a lot of pain. So we have a whole spectrum of how it's really being experienced in the church today. And we're all church members and we're all experiencing it in really different ways. But what I think everybody has loved about your halftime shows and your analysis is that you and the team that you put together, the people that you've worked with, the analysis was so good. It was spot on. It was sort of intellectually stimulating. We could really put our finger on, oh yeah, that's why it may hurt that person, or that's why it's potentially problematic. This is what really worked and this is what we enjoyed. And it was blooming funny.
Can I just say, how did I not know about these halftime shows?
Oh, I don't know.
Because I may have watched had I known. Jane, you're such a terrible friend.
No,
you did not keep me posted.
The reason why, so Alana spends a lot of time, and not a lot of time, normal time on social media, right? And normally Alana would have picked up, Alana watches Nemo's content, subscribes to all of these things. What happens is people get so triggered by the idea of conference that you just filter it out.
Yeah.
Some people leave social media for the whole weekend.
I was just about to say, I know someone in my family who did that. He couldn't cope with it, not being in the church. He actually just deleted his Instagram, I think, and Facebook for that reason.
And after conference, you then get lots of well-meaning church members who'll then send conference talks, their conference talk of choice. I listened to this talk and I thought of you, and it can just be a car crash. Yeah. So yeah, busy weekend. Would it be okay if we get you to bring us up to speed with who you are, for people who haven't yet met you or I don't know what you're doing? Could you maybe share a bit about your background? What how did you get to this space?
Okay, so I discovered the problematic issues of the church, as many do, in the beginning of 2020. That's when everything kind of all fell apart for me. And in the process of reconstruction, I went through my angry phase. I went through the phase of I'm leaving the church behind, I'm having nothing to do with it. And then I thought, well, no. Of all the people that would have inspired me, it was actually Mike Norton, new name Noah, who said something that stuck out to me. He said, if you're in a building that's on fire, you can either get yourself out or you can warn others on the way out. I thought, that's fair, isn't it? And what should I do? So I started telling people. I started a series of Facebook posts just based around the church's gospel topics essays, because I didn't know about them. Lots of people I knew didn't know about them. So I thought we need to talk about them. We need to talk about this. And still to this day, very little of what I do doesn't come from church sources. That's my thing, is that a lot of what I look at source-wise is either it's either so historical that it's like a newspaper article and it doesn't matter what your beliefs are about the source because it's just historical fact, or it's from the church's website. I'm never quoting New Name Noah or anything like that. So I did all those Facebook posts, and then I did an interview with John Dehlin, and I spoke to him about what it was like being a UK Latter-day Saint and going through this. And from that, a lot of people liked what I had to say, and I started to get involved with Sunstone a little bit. And then the idea came along that I could live fact check church leaders and talks. And I'd been playing around with that idea for a little bit. And then the This Is the Show videos came up with Kwaku and such, which, for those who don't know, very briefly, they were a series of videos that basically sought to take the CES letter, which is a document that a lot of people who discover the issues with the church read. They decided to take that and make straw man arguments, so bad, poor argument making. They decided to really try and pull it apart with just really poor, rational thinking and arguments. So I could not hold it in anymore. I reacted to those videos, and my format kind of came straight away, where I'd watch them, and as I watched them, I'd pause and point out the issues as I went along. So if it was a 10-minute video, I'd take it to 20 minutes, right? It would just, so my content was never too long for people. So that's what I would do. And then I thought, well, I can do this about more than just those videos. So I started to get some of the churches Now You Know series of videos, started to do those. And then, it just built and built and built. People were sending me videos to look at, oh, you'd be good at this, you'd be good at that. And I just started to do that and started a YouTube channel proper to do it. And here's where I am almost a year later.
Yeah. When you say, the Mike Norton comment, does that mean that you're on your way out? This is a very Mormon question. Everybody wants to know, where do you stand exactly? So are you on your way out?
I don't think so. Certainly not, unless I'm thrown out by security. But with my hands tied behind my back. I'm in that place to use that metaphor still about the burning building. I've discovered that the building is on fire, and I'm going door to door and trying to wake as many people up as possible. And I haven't reached that decision point where, okay, it's getting so hot that I have to either now get out or die here getting people out, right? I've not reached that decision point yet. So at the moment, I'm still just running around trying to not wake people up, because that sounds derogatory, and I don't like this idea that there are just all these people with the wool over their eyes, and if only they knew, they'd be different, because it's far more complicated than that. It's very much about just making sure that people are aware, because ultimately, if someone chooses to stay in a dangerous situation, say in this metaphor, that is their choice, and I can't drag them out. That's not what I'm doing. I'm just letting people know that there's a problem. That's kind of, I'm not on my way out by any means. I'm very much in, because in is where I can do the most good, and in is where I want to be. Yeah.
I find that interesting, that I hear people who say that, that they feel they can do the most good in, whereas I don't see that. I just look and think, well, what can you do, being in, because people don't listen. You don't have that voice sitting in the church pews where you can speak your truth or how you feel differently. So I'm not taking away from how you feel in any way, but I struggle to see that how you feel you can do more good in, because I can't see that, because that's part of the reason I left, because I felt I was basically just silenced, and not just even as a woman, just in general, because I couldn't have my say. I couldn't say, well, I view that differently to you. How can you, because you're shot down for it, and so I struggled to see that.
So I was. When you mentioned being a woman, I was going to say I'm sitting on a mountain of privilege here in that respect. I'm a young married white male in the church, right? I'm straight, all that sort of thing. My life in the church is my oyster, and a part of me feels not responsible for that, because it's not my fault. It just is. It is how it is. I didn't rig the game, right? It just happens to be stacked that way. And I feel like the best thing you can do if the odds are stacked in your favor is to use them favorably. You can meme that if you like. Because they are.
Someone get me the timestamp.
They are, because that's it. If anyone has any ability to do something about anything, it would be people that the system is designed for. The men, the married men, the men who are straight, or that sort of thing. So I can totally get your way of thinking as well, and there are times when I do feel a bit powerless. I think, is this all you self-reflect and you think, right, well, at the end of all this, what will really change? But I won't know until I've tried. And I think I can't I can't not try.
No, absolutely. I'm not taking away
Yeah.
from that at all.
Yeah.
But I just.
And that's
struggle with it.
actually kind of where I come from as well. It's, you know, if I said I was going to do it, I've made a commitment, and if it all is not looking the way it should be, then, you know, I relate, I guess, is what I'm saying. And I think it's actually, it's a conversation that Alana and I, you know, we probably need to do another episode on, you know, what women are experiencing in the church, because I think you're hitting the nail on the head when you say that. You know, if we're actually saying as members of the church that with the amount of, even as women, with the amount of privilege, the church is designed for you know, you have got parents in the church, families in the church, you're church royalty, and if you're kidding yourself that you don't have any kind of voice or social capital in that system, then, you know, there are people who genuinely don't have any social capital. And if you just don't like the fact that you're not getting the response that you would like to have, then that's very different. It's exhausting being that person who's always speaking up, or it's exhausting feeling like you're, you know, it's not going the direction that you want to fast enough. And I know I'm being really unfair when I say that, but the thing is, the church, if our argument is that the church will not change, then we would be saying that 100 and how many years of church history, it just suddenly stops changing now because you don't think it's going to change now today.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
I think things will change, but not the things that I feel need to change. And I know that's a completely different ballgame.
But it's humanly not possible for those things that you think won't change not to change.
Yeah, Natasha Helfer spoke about that.
I totally get what you mean. Like, you know, things can change, you know, and I get where you come from, but I just mean, you know, to the extreme or the extent that I think they need to change. I think things will change gradually. I keep saying that to you. I hope for that change. I love for that change, but it was more harmful for me to do that while in the church. You know, I feel I'm better just.
But then that's where the church doesn't hurt me the same way it would hurt you.
Yeah,
just in your situation of what we've spoken about, you know, at Sunstone and things like that, we talk about how the church has affected us. We had all those conversations, and I guess that's my point, is that because the church is designed for me, it's very easy for me just to swan around demanding change because no one bats an eyelid. You know, I people say, oh, why have you not been excommunicated yet? Because who knows? But whatever social capital I have, whatever good favor I have with people is clearly working to my benefit, and I'm just going to keep working it because it's there for me, and it would be a disservice to those who don't have that opportunity not to abuse it, in my view.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I think for me the CES letter is something that it sort of almost becomes when you're in, you have the Book of Mormon. When you're out, you have the CES letter. Could you talk a little bit about the CES letter and the impact that's had on UK saints?
Yeah, the CES letter is an interesting thing. It's a document of questions written by a man who wanted answers. And for me, actually, one of the things that the CES letter exposes the best is just how unwilling the church is to engage properly with questions. That's actually what it teaches me more than anything else. But it, like you said, it can become a thing that people latch onto, because I think a lot of people, when they leave Mormonism, if they're not as cowardly as me and actually just fully step out, because it's far braver in some ways to not do what I've done, because by remaining engaged with it, I'm still, I'm not just setting sail for new shores. I'm kind of sticking around a bit and seeing what I can do. And I have reasons for it, and I hope they're good reasons, but it's a different thing to do. But those that do find themselves kind of bereft of something to hold on to very often land on the CS letter or letter to my wife or things like that. These pinnacles of faith crises, and they can be good for people. And there is a time, I think, for a lot of people where that's the only thing you read. And then you get to a point, hopefully, where you move on from that. And I've noticed that in my own channel, is that in my own channel, right near the beginning, I was just talking about Book of Abraham. I was talking about I was talking about issues with Joseph's polygamy. I was talking about translation of the Book of Mormon. All that sort of stuff was coming up because it was all in my mind, because it was all stuff I'd just learned. Now my channel's focused on, well, here's when Jeffrey R. Holland has actually lied to you. I'm still looking at facts. I'm still looking at problems in the church, but I've stepped away from some of those core fundamentals because those are no longer news to me. And the great thing is that they're still on YouTube, so people can still find them. But the space that the CES letter and perhaps content like mine and other sort of progressive Mormon ideas sit in is a very transient space. It's a space that people move through. People start in one place when their faith first is challenged, and then they move to a different place. And that place they move to looks very different for a lot of people. But at the beginning, it's often quite similar. And I think that's why we have these things. Does that make sense? We have these things that everyone kind of gathers around and clings onto when they're first feeling quite lost. And I think that's why we get a bit of this kind of, it becomes quite sacred, quite a sacred thing. Don't you dare attack the CES letter, because it's been my lifeline, you know, don't take that away from me. Yeah.
And I like how your approach has been, it's bite-sized. I can watch your approach. The CES letter gets, I can not discount, but I don't have time for the CES letter. It's there's so much to it. Where do you start? You're almost sort of being asked to engage apologetically and some kind of back and forward, and it makes me really tired and irritated. And I appreciate that's it's a feeling based response that I have to, because I just can't be bothered sitting through that amount of content. What you're doing is something that's bite sized, that is fact checking, and I like that, and your audience like that. We can do that. We can work with that. And then I'm left with a very simple series of questions that I can ask myself at the end of the. How long have you been doing the fact checking for? How long has that been going?
Just coming up to about a year now, actually. Yeah, about a year. And I did start off with two videos a week because I was just I need to get what's out there. And then I had to calm down a bit. It was wearing me out. And I have a full-time job as well. So, I do this part-time in my spare time, essentially. And I enjoy it, and that's why I do it. But yeah, I had to chill out to one video a week. Yeah, but that's why I've been doing it. I suppose possibly maybe what you're alluding to, I'm going to jump the gun a little bit, is how long have I actually been thinking like this? How long has my brain worked this way?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually did an A-level in critical thinking at college, which I failed.
Oh.
Because,
I wonder why.
Yeah. But that was my first encounter with it, and I couldn't get a grip on it. And then at university,
what did that look like? What was being presented? Tell me how you. Why would you have failed that? Because members of the church stink.
Yeah. So that gets down to the core of a couple of things. First, critical thinking is, as an A-level, critical thinking is actually quite a structured and sort of almost dogmatic way of thinking. There are rules to critical thinking. When you hear me use terms like straw man and ad hominem and things like that, those are almost legally defined terms in a sense. They have that legalistic sort of feeling. They're very clearly defined terms that exist within this structure that is critical thinking. Critical thinking is a system that allows you to look at anyone's argument and decide whether parts of it are good, parts of it are bad, or whatnot. But critical thinking requires you to involve a part of your brain that is empathetic towards someone else's position. You have to take yourself out of your own way of thinking in order to understand someone else's point. So we would be presented with a text, for example, in the class, and then you would be told to critically analyze it using certain methods, of which I can't actually remember it off the top of my head. But there were certain methods where you would pick apart an argument. You would ask, why is this being written? What is this trying to achieve? These sorts of things. You'd ask yourself a series of questions regarding the text, and then you would look for ways in which it doesn't work. And you sort of pick up a knack for it. I couldn't get that knack for it because as a member of the church, I lived within a very structured worldview. I think exMos Lex actually says it best when she says she didn't believe the church was true. That was her reality. And for a lot of people, the LDS church is not a belief system. It is reality. It is just so. It is what we have. So in that system, you can't ask yourself to imagine what would it be like if I didn't believe the church was true, because it's not a belief. You're asking yourself to imagine what it'd be like if the earth was flat, right? Sorry to any flat earthers, but you'd be having to take yourself out of reality, and that's really difficult to do. So I failed it.
Well, could I ask though? Do we have to do that? Isn't that isn't that almost the peak of what your faith should look like, what a testimony is, that you have this knowledge that is your world and your reality? Why would you want to think in a different way about that?
Because that's very fragile. It's contrary to that idea that we had in early Mormonism, where we took the best of everything that everyone had to offer and we just made it work. When you know that you are 100% right about everything, you are unable to take the good that someone else might have to offer. And we lose a lot when we stop taking what others have to offer, because we don't have a monopoly on goodness in the world. And that's in, I'm pretty sure that's in scripture. I can't remember whereabouts it is, but that's in the Book of Mormon. There's a scripture that essentially alludes to, it's around the time when we're talking about other sheep and other people on the Isles of the Sea and things like that. Talking about other groups of people. And there's a comment made that those other people also have value and have worth. And, that's something once you realize you can bring in and consolidate into your system. But if you're too rigid, you can't do that. And we want that. Because if we believe that we're all children of God, I think it's this simple. If we believe we're all children of God, then all those children have value. And it's arrogant and wrong to say that just because I happen to be born in one place thinking one thing because my parents thought one thing, that those other people don't have value and I'm the only one with anything to give. And we try and say that as a church, but it's always under this idea that we're going to bring other people into our way of thinking. And that was never the game before. The reason we have the Tabernacle Choir is because the Welsh love to sing. And we had a lot of Welsh saints that went over with the early pioneers and they said, we will have a choir. And that is now part of what we do. The reason we have meeting houses and not traditional chapels is because we're a Protestant movement. We took that from another tradition. There's so much about Mormonism that isn't ours. And then to try and say that we have all truth, even though we've already taken this from other people, is like saying English is the most pure language, despite the fact that it's made up of other ones. It doesn't work. And so we can't then say, right, we have English and we're never going to change it again, because new words are getting invented all the time and it makes the language richer and better. So that's why you don't want to say, well, I know all the truth and nothing's changing it, because you miss out on a lot. Yeah. And
I think that's why we get to a place where members can't see that change is possible. We're actively teaching that change isn't possible, that change doesn't, that doctrines do not change. Now we know we can demonstrate that every core doctrine has changed and changed and changed again.
But see, this is where, Jane, when you said to me, remember the first time I ever said to you, like, but doctrine doesn't change in the church. And again, I didn't think out with that, because that's just what I was taught. So I believed that. But then when Jane's actually, Alana, loads of things have changed over the years. But in my mind, it hadn't, because I was taught that growing up. I was taught doctrine never changed. So in my mind, well, it doesn't. So why would they change it now? But obviously, Jane allowed me to see a different side of that. And I'm like, of course it's changed. Like, why did I not think that way? You know?
And so we're left with a with a belief system that is so rigid that we can't allow for change, we can't allow for growth and development, and in the same breath talk about how we are a living church with a living prophet and living scripture and all of this, all of these great and marvelous things that have yet to be revealed. We don't have room to accept anything else when we are so rigid that it's already been done, it's already been established.
And this is why I kind of come up with, talking about unrighteous dominion having crept into the leaders of the church, and you look at how it's defined in Doctrine and Covenants, and you see that one of the things in unrighteous dominion is holding power by the virtue of the priesthood office you hold and not by virtue of your good works. And I think we've seen this over time, is that every group of people just wants to say, well, I'm the prophet, therefore because all these prophets have grown up in a type of the church, and they all try and hold on to it so long, because as far as they're concerned, because they're the prophet, therefore their Mormon experience was exactly the correct one, and that's the one we should all be having. And then the next prophet had a slightly different one. The next prophet had a slightly different one, because it changes subtly and slowly. That's why I don't think we see the big changes, because it's so small, because those prophets think that by virtue of them being the prophet, therefore their experience of Mormonism is the right one. And it doesn't have that volatile changing method, because unfortunately, as Unrighteous Dominion shows us, people want to become in charge. And once they get a little bit of power, once they get a little bit of control, they want to keep things the way they are when they're in control. Because ultimately it would be fair, wouldn't it? That, oh, well, if I let the church change, I might lose control over it, because this is the church I've known.
Thing that we want. We want to control our experience. We want to replicate what is working. It's very understandable.
Oh, absolutely. It's really understandable. It comes down to something I think Jonathan Haidt talks about in his book, The Righteous Mind. You can pop that in the show notes if you want. It's a very good book. He says that for human beings, it is more important to appear right than to be right. And I think you could say the same about prophets. It's more important for them to appear as the prophet. It's more important for them to fulfill what they think a prophet needs to be than to actually be correct and to be doing what's best for the church, unfortunately.
Alana's had to go and
That's
deal
fine.
with her.
There we go.
So I can ask this now. So we got to have at Sunstone a few weeks ago. We got to have a fantastic Sunday school experience where the teacher was Nemo the Mormon. It was so blooming good. Would you take us through what your approach was and what happened there?
Okay, yeah. So Sunday school very often in the church is a place where you go to hear the same things repeated over and over again. It's where you go to have your beliefs affirmed and bolstered. It's not where you go to have your beliefs challenged. And so I wanted people to challenge their own beliefs in a way that wasn't me just directly challenging people, because that sort of confrontation could lead people to lock up and not want to change their mind. So what I did...
Wait, could I just before we go any further, Alana, what did you think you were going to get out of Sunday school? Your Sunday school experience that morning?
To be honest, I wasn't sure at first, because I know that you'd said obviously that it was going to be different, but I still imagined like the kind of whole preaching thing, but just a wee bit of discussion between everybody. I did not expect what actually happened, so it was quite refreshing.
Yeah, Alana has post-traumatic church.
Oh, I hate Sunday school.
And so it was like, we'll do Sunday school. I mean, it was purely because you were doing Sunday school that this was something that we would look forward to.
See, if it was anyone else, I possibly would have been like, nah, I'm not doing it. But it was you.
Thank you.
Right, let's see how this goes.
Thanks. Well, I'm glad you did.
And I think for me, because I'm going to circle back round to what we experienced from this. I was expecting I'm going to hear an edgy perspective, or maybe a different way of thinking about something that I haven't thought about before. Probably not in the realm of like the deep doctrine cool stuff that you would have fun with, but I'm thinking I'm going to have a sort of wake up moment where I'm going to hear something really cool and go, yeah, that's absolutely a really fresh way of thinking about a thing. Does that make sense? I'm going to find out something about a thing, right?
And I knew that's what people were expecting of me.
Yeah.
And part of me wanted to just not give that, because I thought, and part of it's because there's a lot of pressure on me to do that, because I'm not people. I'm not the most clever person in this space by any stretch of the imagination, and I'm not the most original thinker either. I'm not the person that's coming up with all the original thoughts and all this. It's not what I do really. I'm kind of I provide cliff notes in some sense. A lot of what I do is I take what's already out there. Some of it is new. Some of it I do come up with myself. Like I'm not going to downplay myself entirely, but I essentially take what's going on around me and I condense it in a way that hopefully people can take in a bit easier. Because, you go to Peter Bleakley's levels of a 3-hour podcast, you go to Mr. Sunday School's levels of a small shareable meme, and somewhere in between that is the space I try and exist in, where I've got long enough to give people something, short enough that they can stay paying attention.
When I say I'm expecting to learn a thing, I'm thinking along the lines of Abraham got it wrong, that maybe prophets are kind of human, and something I've probably heard before, but here's a really cool, edgy, fun way of thinking about it. Something that is not going to necessarily rock my world, but will have been amazing.
Okay.
So you're doing Sunday school.
Yeah. So everyone pitched up, and I started off talking a little bit about. So I started off by doing a thought experiment with everyone. So I'll get everyone to close their eyes and imagine that aliens exist, which already for some people is putting them in a position where they're having to imagine something they don't believe is true. So imagine that aliens exist, and then imagine that you've been given the job of being their tour guide. And you're floating along through the sky, and you look down and see a rugby pitch. And then you have to explain to this alien what that is, because the alien asks these series of questions. And the series of questions were something like, why are there no women on the field? Because it was a men's rugby game. Why aren't the people watching allowed to join in? What is a team? What is a game? What is the point? Those sorts of questions, right? Quite big questions about something quite small. And so I got people to do that, close their eyes, think about it. I did that to put them in a headspace where they aren't normally, where people aren't normally having all their presuppositions, all their preconceived ideas about the way the world works, because you're having to try and explain it to someone who doesn't understand. Then what I did was I asked everyone very bluntly who believes in miracles, and we had a smattering of hands. And then I asked who didn't, and kind of got a vibe with the room. And I split some. I think, did I move some people? Did I make it fair? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think you'd asked people to pick their side.
Yeah.
But I don't know if there was much of a difference.
Yeah. So
you gave them space to, if they really needed to. Yeah. But
if they needed to move, they could.
But you were making it really clear, you may be on a side here that you're arguing for something.
So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to put people in a position where they would be arguing for a point of view that they don't hold themselves. Because that is some of the keys to critical thinking, is being able to, and it's something I took great joy in doing at university, and I've done it other times, formally debating for a point I do not believe in myself, but forcing myself to come up with good arguments anyway. Because when you believe in something, it's very easy to come up with arguments. And it's also very easy to come up with bad arguments, because you have an emotional drive to want that thing to be correct. When you no longer have that emotional drive to want something to be correct, which is particularly poignant when it comes to the church, because of course, emotionally, we want it to be true. So if you can put yourself in a position where you have no emotional drive for something to be correct, then all you've got left is logic. And so you've got to come up with logically arguments for something. So I gave one group the task of arguing that miracles have ceased. And I gave the other group the task of arguing that miracles have not ceased. And everyone kind of looked at me a bit funny at first, and then they started to get on with it. And someone said, "Can we have a definition of a miracle?" And I said, "No, you can't," initially. And so everyone was kind of working out, well, what is a miracle, that sort of stuff. And what that did, that got people slightly comfortable in doing it. But you could make arguments that, well, if we say a miracle is this, then of course they still exist. Or if we say a miracle is that, then about halfway through, I gave everyone a cast iron definition of a miracle that they had to work with. And then that forces you to step it up again, because you're again playing by someone else's rules. You don't get to dictate the rules of the game yourself anymore. So that's what I did.
Yeah. Alana, how did you experience that?
It was different, and like I said, I think it took me by surprise because it was not what I expected at all. I was a little bit tired that day from getting in a bit late, so I don't know that I was fully in the full zone that I would have normally. But it was interesting to hear different points of view, because, like you said, it's like, what do you define as a miracle? You know, because some people see miracles as, you know, Jesus walking on the water and turning the water into wine and things. Whereas, you know, for me, I say that my miracle was having my daughter, because she saved me at a dark time in my life. So to me, that was my miracle, you know. So it was different to look at how different people perceive a miracle and why they feel miracles don't happen. And, you know, it was very interesting. As you say, it's good to think of it in both sides, you know, rather than just having, because in my opinion, I'm like, well, yeah, miracles happen every day, you know. But to someone else, and there were people who were like, I don't believe in miracles. I don't believe, you know. But again, it's how you define a miracle, I guess, is how you look at
it's
it.
okay, because Neil Anderson said at this last conference that when they were looking to buy the domain names for churchofjesuschrist.org, they became available around the time of the announcement that we would stop using Mormon.org. It was a miracle.
Oh, okay.
So, you know, miracle has a very loose definition. So don't worry about that.
Yeah, running as far away as we can from that quote. What I thought was incredible about this is I could see then, okay, we're doing something really interesting with arguing for or looking at things in a different way. We're hearing different approaches. It wasn't until right at the very end that I got to have that moment where I realized, so you had sort of pointed out that maybe this is something that we could take back into our lives, to church experience if we're there, where if someone else is arguing for their point, that we don't have to be threatened by that. And now that sounds totally reasonable, and we know that, until we realize, oh, wait a minute. So the person who's really rigid in thinking that, you know, the person who's given that, so you know, Elder Anderson, who got his miracle, who got his domain names, that we don't have to feel personally attacked because of their point of view that they're holding on to, that they're arguing for. And I really love that, because up until that point, it's, okay, here's how I can think differently. Here's how I can wake up. Here's how we can have conversations that may, let's redefine a miracle. Let's reject the whole definition of miracle that we've just been presented with. We could have tons of fun with that. But fundamentally, what about whenever at the end of the day we're going to come into conversation with people who just think differently? And I love that.
Yeah. And I invited everyone at the end to, if anything had been said that made them uncomfortable, because everyone had been respectful, I invited them just to sit with it and be uncomfortable. And learning to be uncomfortable is something we're not very good at, but we need to be better at. Yeah.
See, I think that. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say that one of the kindest things a Sunday school teacher or member of the church can do is give the people in the congregation permission to be uncomfortable. Alana, sorry, what were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say, like, that's something, again, that, you know, I thought about a lot, because, you know, I sit there and think, you know, how uncomfortable I've felt at times during Sunday school when things are getting said that I don't agree with or that I think is completely wrong. But when you look at it from the other perspective, that had I said what I feel, are other people going to feel uncomfortable? But I think, again, that's where, you know, I feel that we should all get to that space where we should be okay with sitting in Sunday school and feeling a little uncomfortable. You know, I guess for me, sometimes I've walked out because it's been painful, you know, some of the things for me, and I've not been able to listen to it. But it's like, again, it's going to that, you know, sitting in Sunday school where I feel it's saying to people, it's okay to feel uncomfortable sometimes. But we get to a point where we think, you know, because it's not the norm. Like, I see someone in the comments, you know, saying they feel that some members aren't looking to learn something new, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we should be able to get to a comfortable place where we can learn something new or have a different way of thinking about something, because I just think we get so comfortable as church members that this is what's taught, or like I've realised a lot through speaking with Jane and various people, I've learned that sometimes the things that I have learned is not necessarily what the church teaches, but how other people have perceived that teaching. And so I think sometimes it has to be addressed in that sense, because, you know, we can't just keep going along and being comfortable, you know, all the time. Things aren't going to happen.
Isn't it okay if, you know, and I will constantly ask for, you know, I will challenge based on this, and I'm not saying it's right. When I get to 70 years old and I've done my bit in the world and I just want to go to church on a Sunday and hear about Jesus, and there's all of this, like, you know, all of these people who want to disrupt how I'm thinking and make me feel uncomfortable, I don't want to. Talk to me about that. Can church just be somewhere where I can feel safe and loved and come into communion with Jesus?
Okay. 70-year-old Jane has been let down by someone at some point. If at that age that makes you uncomfortable, if you've been in the church that long, if things are still coming up that you didn't know about at 70, someone's let you down. Yeah, I would say, because I understand. I think more of what you're saying is that, do we always need to have that debate? Do we always need to have that discussion? Can't we all just have a conversation where, you know, we hear just the same things repeated and that comforts us? And I think there's a reason that we have different parts of church. And I think it's one of the underutilized things about the church. We have sacrament meeting where we hear people give talks, and we take the sacrament, which is the same every week, and we hear hymns that are familiar. That's what we get from that part. That is the ritual. That is the sacrament that we all partake in. That's the uniform thing. The Sunday school, for me, has the word school in it for a reason. And if you're 70 or you're 17, you're there to learn. And you're only going to learn if you're hearing things that you didn't know already, because it's not learning to have what you already know told to you again. That's remembering. That's not learning. So it can be done in a way where 70-year-old Jane can be comfortable and happy, because part of that, because what I don't do is just drop a grenade into a room and just let it go off. There's a sense of management to it. You have to be. Sunstone was good because everyone there understood that this was a place where you could be vulnerable and you could be honest and you weren't going to be judged for it, because it is a place that by nature, people there are going to be challenged, and they know they're going to be challenged. Everyone there is voluntarily there. So we need to create that space in Sunday school. People need to engage respectfully. Differences of opinions work and they edify each other when they're expressed respectfully. When people are shouting at each other and trying to tear each other down and using the phrase "you're wrong," that doesn't work. That's not going to give 70-year-old Jane her warm fuzzies. You know?
Yeah. See, that's what I was thinking. I don't imagine that when I say I need church to be different, I don't imagine that I'm saying that I want a total debate. Like, that's not what I'm looking for. But I'm just fed up of sitting and hearing pretty much, as you say, the same things. It's taught the same way. We don't try and look at it a different way or explore different thoughts and ideas. And that's what makes it difficult for me, because I'm like, I've heard all this. It might be a different person teaching it. It might be taught in a slightly different way, but it's just not what I'm needing right now. And like you say, you know, it just becomes that repetitiveness. And what happens when that happens to me is I just switch off. So I'm there in body, but I'm not really getting anything from church because I just switch off, because I think I've heard all this before.
Yeah. Yeah,
and
absolutely.
That, I think, is actually hitting the nail on the head for, you know, we're often talking about the post-COVID return to church and that space that that lots of people are sort of in, where they just don't know if they want to go back or they've enjoyed the break and things. what you're alluding to there is actually what I'm hearing so much is a craving for intellectual stimulation that you're not getting at church, spiritually stimulating. You know, that it can tick those boxes too, and I think that's why, as a member of the church, I find what you're doing. I mean, it should be a little bit threatening. It should be a little bit disruptive. Of course, it should make me think, but it's wonderful. It's exciting. It's stimulating. My faith should be able to, handle these types of things that you're talking about. So yeah, I totally agree, and I love what you guys are saying, and I think that's why this is a really exciting time. So yeah, if you could sum up then why we need a fact checker in the church, because
Sorry, can I just say quickly, I'm laughing at Doug's comment here about taking his iPad to church, because it made me laugh there, because like Jane will tell you, like my mum, who's not so active in the church at the minute, like used to give me in trouble because she's like, you're always on your phone. And I tried to explain to her that a lot of the time it was to stop my anxiety from kicking in, because Jane will tell you I had really bad church anxiety, and my phone, as Jane will tell you, when I get anxious, that's my go-to. So that kind of made me laugh, because I used to get into trouble from my mum for always being on my phone, and I'm an adult. I'm an adult. I'm not a child anymore.
There'll be a letter in the post to Doug from Alana's mum.
Sorry, carry on.
No,
yes. So why do we need fact checkers? The church is all about truth.
Yeah. Right.
I'm so sorry, and I know this is really patronising, but Nemo's laugh. We need an outtakes reel of Nemo and Peter's giggle. It's brilliant, right?
Why do we need fact? Well, we shouldn't, but we do, and I think everyone, in an ideal world, everyone can fact check everything they hear. In an ideal world, that's where we are. Everyone can just fact check what they hear, because the moment someone says something to you, you can ask yourself a couple of questions. Why are they saying this? So why are they telling me this? Why do they think I need to hear this? And what do they gain from telling me it? And just those two questions make you start to think critically about what you're being told, rather than just taking it in because of how it makes you feel. So ideally, in doing what I'm doing, I'm making myself redundant. The best thing I could do is make myself unnecessary, because it means that everyone's learned how to see something, analyze it, and go, but the other thing, and how do I say this without sounding like a bit of a tool? A lot of what people say to me is that I articulate what they can't quite put into words. And I do think I find it easier to put my thoughts into words than some people do. So for me, I think that's where some of my purpose is that I can put into words what other people can't necessarily articulate, but they know that that's how they feel. And that can be validating for some people. And I think at the moment, particularly, people who are doubtful or curious or critical, they don't have any validating voices within the church at all, because it's not a natural thing for us to be critical thinkers. I've talked about how it's quite a rigid thing. It's something you have to kind of learn. But I think it is very natural for us to be curious to some extent or another. Some people are far more curious than others, but I think everyone has a certain level of curiosity within them. And that's the thing that unfortunately the church can squash out of people. It's the thing that can be pressed out of people in the name of protecting their faith or in the name of strengthening them. But I don't think it does. I think it does a disservice to members. I don't think it strengthens them at all, because as J. Reuben Clark says, and this is such a cliche and everyone says it, but if we have the truth, it cannot be harmed by investigation. I'm not going to quote the second part because we don't need to get into that. But surely, if something is true, you can investigate it all you like, and it still comes out true. So we shouldn't be afraid of challenging things, I don't think. So why do we need a fact checker? I think it's because it's a skill that I think everyone needs. And everyone's analysis will be different, and not everyone will come to the same conclusion, and that's also totally fine. And that's why I constantly say that if you hear everything I have to say and decide you're going to remain a member of the church, and that you still believe all the truth claims to the church, then good on you. It's fine, because you're informed. You know what's going on. You you have the ability to decide for yourself that, okay, this is good for me. But you can't make that informed decision until you have the tools necessary to, not even to justify to others, but just to examine within yourself whether something is right.
But again, I don't think that's something we're taught growing up in the church anymore. For anyone who's grew up in the church,
no.
we're not taught. We're taught to believe everything that we're told, you know, because I've never had reason in my life to really question. Like, I've questioned a few things in the past in my younger teens and things, but I've never really questioned or really looked into things like, you know, things that I've been horrified by, you know, about the Book of Mormon not being a literal translation. I would never have, see, if somebody had told me that years ago, I'd be like, you're talking absolute utter crap. Like, I'd have been like, what are you even talking about? You know, but now that I'm older and I've had that switch go off where I'm like, why should I just believe everything I'm being told? You know, but again, it's because we're not taught or conditioned with that. And something else that I always say as well is, you know, when you're talking about having difference of opinions, this is something, again, I've learned in later life, is that it's okay to have difference of opinions. Like, I can think one thing, you can think another. Doesn't mean your opinion's right, and it doesn't mean my opinion's right, or vice versa. It doesn't mean you're wrong and I'm wrong, because it's okay to be in different places. I've always been that person where one thing's got to be right and that's it. You know, you can't have that, but you absolutely can have that space where just because you feel that way doesn't mean that my opinion's wrong or not valid, you know. And again, these are all things that I'm now learning in my 30s, you know.
That's something that I really struggle with, is when I really believe that fundamentally the thing that you are saying or hold to be true is damaging, is hurtful, or could cause pain to someone. You know, if it's just you, I can think, oh, you're a bit of an idiot for that. What kind of idiot thinks that? But that's between you and you know, your conscience. But when the stakes are higher, I really struggle, and that's why having that, I think that experience in you know, in Sunday school where you sort of modelled that was really, really helpful.
I think the other thing about needing a fact checker, just real quick, is that off the back of what you said about how the stakes being higher, the stakes are higher for the leaders of the church. The people that don't fact check are local Sunday school teachers, right? Why would I? But when you speak to a church of millions and you declare something to be the way it is, when you say what M. Russell Ballard said, we haven't hidden things from you, we know that's not true. And that doesn't invalidate the truth claims of the church on its own. It doesn't. And to draw that conclusion would be crazy. But when you have people who, for whatever reason, because they're scared of losing whatever it is the church means to them, because they're scared of the church falling apart, they feel this responsibility to keep this great tradition moving on. They feel like gatekeepers of something. You know, all those emotions are going to be going through their heads. So they have incentive to appear right. Like I said earlier, it's more important for them to appear right than to be right. If they appear correct and they make everyone feel good about what they say, that's more important to them than actually being correct. And the problem with that is, once it becomes uncovered, trust is what suffers. People don't trust them anymore. I don't think people should, because they've proven to us that they can't be trusted. And this is another reason I think the church needs fact checkers, unfortunately, is because this current generation of leaders aren't trustworthy. And so people need to know that. And if people know that, they can then, rather than trusting them, they can start to trust themselves and start to ask themselves questions. Well, okay, I'm going to take things statement by statement and decide, is this true? Is it not true? And then people will come to their own conclusions, as we've kind of covered. But we can't trust the leaders of the church to be the ones that determine whether it's true or not, because we know they've lied. It's provable. I've done it on my channel, and it's an ongoing series because, unfortunately, they keep doing it. Sorry, what were you going to say, Jane? Sorry.
I was going to ask you, it's actually just building on what you were just saying. So you use the name Nemo, and there can be this tendency for church members to, you know, as I said earlier, you've got the Book of Mormon, or when you leave, you've got the CES letter. You know, you can go into sort of those extremes. We also are looking naturally for leaders. So, you know, what's Nemo saying, what's Peter saying, what's John Dehlin saying, RFM, all of those people who are doing a great job, but we gravitate towards certain voices. And I'd like to know what your thoughts are on that. But I'd like to sort of to frame it with, I don't know if you remember it, Alana, way back. So you two had met through, was it the pageant, Douglas? Did you guys meet? Was it the pageant?
I don't know if it
The
was a
what do you call it, the
pageant or
war
if it
thing?
was it.
The
I don't
World
know if it
War.
was that or the World War
It was.
thing.
It
Or
was. I think it was Our Story Goes On, wasn't
I was
it?
going to say, I said that to Ben. I
Sorry,
thought it
that
was
was
our
it.
story.
It was Oscar, yeah.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
we did Voices of the Great War, and then
I remember you and I were skiving out in the hallway.
Oh yeah, we were always causing trouble. It was you, me,
I think
and
was it not church on the Sunday and me and you just like we're just in the corridor having a conversation?
yeah, because even at that point, I struggled with church. I
Yeah.
struggled with how monotonous it was. Yeah.
Did
So
you? That's
I did.
So,
Yeah.
for those who don't know, there was a sort of performance that was touring around the UK, and it was sort of underpinned by the church, really, right? You guys were traveling around doing all that kind of thing, and so you two had kind of met before, and I remember Alana and I were having a conversation because the stuff that you were doing was starting to come up on my timeline. Was, you know, people were talking about it, and I tend to eye roll and think, okay, so we've got another. I'm just going to be totally blunt.
Yeah.
We've got another guy who served a mission who is now annoyed at the church and right, what's your problem now, pal? And that was very, because there's been so many people who do this now. Very, very quickly we can see, oh, okay, hold on, that something different is going on here. Your content has made you beloved of everyone, and it's been so good to see the response that you get to that. But I've got to admit, I was initially very skeptical.
That's
Another
fair.
male voice is
Totally
just what
fair.
we need in the ex-Mormon world, you know. It's that said, this is really accessible, really relevant. But tell me about your voice. What is making it so unique? And if I were to ask, why should people listen to you?
I love your little chuckle.
You shouldn't. You really shouldn't listen to me. So I keep coming back to this, but I think it's really important.
Yeah,
it's more important for us to appear right than to be right, and that is a trap I could so easily fall into. And I think it's a trap we all fall into at some point. I still get a gut, well, not anymore really, but I did right near the beginning get a gut-dropping feeling when someone would challenge me in the comments on what I said, because there's a tendency there to think, well, I've done all my research, so I'm now correct, and I'm now going to share this. And very quickly you realize, well, no, that's me wanting to appear right. If I really want to be correct, then if someone has a legitimate concern about what I've said, I better buck up and listen to it, because only then can I know that I'm actually correct. If I can look at someone's challenge and go, no, there's not merit to that, or I can contend with it, or I can admit, no, okay, they're right there, which I have done. Fortunately, never enough that I've had to recall a video or take one down or change it, because I'm quite conscious of what claims I make in those videos. So there's that. I also try and hold myself accountable by putting all my sources in the comments, in the description. So if you go into the description of any of my videos, you'll find all the sources I use to research. And sometimes that means there's like 20, 30 different links you could click on. And that's because then people can decide for themselves whether I'm right or not. I've taken all those sources, I've put them together in a video as I understand them, and sticking as close to them as possible, I hope that keeps me correct. But people can look at those and they'll come up to different conclusions, and then they can tell me about it, and I can see different perspectives. You know, there's the people that yell at me in the comments and say, get your eye fixed or whatever, and I'm just like, oh, fine, whatever, I'll leave that alone. But when people are being very constructive in the comments towards me and they're saying, oh, well, if you consider this perspective, you consider that perspective, I'll engage with them. I have chats with them. I've turned critics into friends this way. I've turned people that are telling me I'm wrong, and quite harshly, their tone softens and we have a conversation, because I'm like, yeah, no, thank you for sharing your concerns. I maybe don't see it that way or whatever, but we have a comment like that. So why listen to my voice? I would say don't. Just listen to my voice, because otherwise you just, you're doing kind of what you're alluding to there, Jane. You're just putting yourselves in the hands of someone else who could ultimately let you down, because I'm under no illusions that I could let listeners down at any point by getting something wrong. That's very possible. I try my best not to, but it could happen. So in that respect, don't just listen to me, please. Please don't. Easier said than done, I know, because everyone loves my accent, obviously. But, you know, right? You guys have got the same curse, you know, having an interesting accent is what does it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, that's so about my voice, other things about my voice, I feel like I've always had one. I've always been able to put what's in my head out there quite well. From an early age, I was always doing public speaking and things. So I feel like I have that ability. So that's why I've chosen to do it this way. Really.
I just have to ask, did you do the speech festivals that the church had?
We didn't have any.
Did you not have it?
No.
Yeah, we used to have them quite regular up
I did
here.
road shows.
We had to have a little presentation put together to stand, and I remember just feeling I was so nervous. I hated it because I hate public speaking, and like I kind of felt we had to do it. You know, looking back now, I would have just been like, I'm not doing it, and that's it. But oh yeah, I just wanted to go back as well. I was chuckling earlier when you said about the comments, because Jane will tell you I get so defensive of everyone, like you especially. And Peter, see if I see someone being quite nasty, or just she'll tell you, I'm screenshotting it and I'm messaging. I'm like, can you believe that person? How dare they say that to my Nemo? Like, you know, I get so defensive over it, and you're all like, you know, it's so good and healthy. And I'm like, no, you've not got the right to say that, you know.
We literally we sit together calling on the spirits of our ancestors to nobody messes with people we love in the comments. But then also,
and Jane will say to me, why do you read the comments?
yeah, we don't hang out in the comments. Okay, tell us how to think.
No, I can't do that. You got to think for yourself. Obviously, if someone sound bites that and then takes my response, they're just gonna be like, see, Nemo's just indoctrinating people. He's brainwashed, but he's telling them how to think.
Not telling us how to think. Oh no.
Yeah. Oh dear. Where's that happened before? So how to? I suppose it's a question: how to think critically, how to.
So I am sitting in your Sunstone Sunday School class, and I feel like I can take one of two positions. So I'm making an argument that miracles exist, but I also feel like I either get to 100% support what is being said and sort of align myself with that, or if I want to take a position where I could possibly think something contrary to that, I want to be sarcastic, or I want to be I feel like I'm not in alignment with my own values. Does that make sense? I feel like I want to be contrary and critical. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So how can I just how can I be open? How can I listen? And how can maybe take us through some of the finer points of how what skills I could maybe think about developing.
Okay.
No pressure, Nemo. No pressure.
So I struggle with being sarcastic. It's something I've had to really stop myself from doing. So it's part of being British, yeah. And particularly when you're confronted with things like Kwaku's show and whatever, it could be very easy just to let loose with some diatribes and be done with it. But then when it comes to holding a position that isn't your own and not just being sarcastic, you can remind yourself that someone somewhere honestly believes this. 9 times out of 10, even when it comes to things like I use this as an example, flat Earth believers, because it to me is really quite a ridiculous belief, but some people sincerely believe it, and so you kind of have to respect that part of it You have to respect the sincerity of their belief. You don't have to necessarily even respect their belief, because if it's harmful and dangerous, then you don't necessarily have to respect it, because it's, it's causing people harm. And that's why that's why I can tear something apart and say, no, this is wrong because this, and this, without attacking the people that believe it themselves, because people sincerely believe things and that's their right to do that. So remembering that there are people involved, I think, helps me not be sarcastic or things like that. That's one way to do it. And I think that's what was really nice about Sunstone, was that you got to see the other group working away as well. And you got to hear because at the end, everyone nominated a spokesperson to present their argument. So you got to hear the other group argue against what you believe or for what you believe, depending on what position you're in. So there's that. So there's a lot of kindness that underpins it, actually. And I saw that exhibited to me by my flatmates at university, because they were dealing with someone who I was very, very zealous as a member of the church in my very literal beliefs in the church at the time. They were very kind and patient with me about contradicting what I believed and asking me to, have you considered this, have you considered that, and putting me in those difficult positions. And that's where I started to then learn how to do that myself. So it's always good to have a mentor, someone else that does it as well. Sorry, I feel like I'm straying away from your question. Just keep me on track. What else is it you're after? Because I'm waffling a bit.
No, I really appreciate this, because I guess what I'm asking is, I want to be able to recognize when I am falling back on weak arguments, or when I am, or how I can recognize that when it's presented to me. So I dislike is recognizing in myself that you're taking this position and you're just being sarcastic. You're just, I felt like I was following along with groupthink really easily, because it was a comfortable position.
Yeah.
And I don't really know where I find the tools to actually start more independently think. I read a lot, so when I'm studying at home, it's easier to recognize. But when I'm in a group discussion, I found that really challenging.
Okay, something you could ask yourself possibly is there's a saying in certain schools of psychology that that people don't have ideas have people, and that actually people become. There's a term called ideological possession. So you can recognize when people are possessed by an ideology, they become they'll defend it no matter what. They won't listen to any contrary evidence. They're not open. They're very closed. And when you're in a group, you could ask yourself, am I having ideas, or are the ideas having me? Am I just is everything else that's being said around me? If you agree with everything that's being said around you all the time, that's either an indicator that you've managed to surround yourself with people that absolutely agree with you, and somehow miraculously you think the same thing all the time, or you're just going along with them. So if you don't find yourself disagreeing, surround yourself with people that you do disagree with. Ooh. And it'll get you used to that feeling of, oh, hang on, I'm not just going to go along with this group. So that's one way to do it, is put yourself in positions where you're surrounded by people that don't think the same way as you. That's kind of what university did to me. You've got people that don't think the same way as you, so you can't just go along with them. So then you've got to come up with thoughts of your own, and then you get better at it and better at it. So don't let the ideas have you, have ideas. And the way to not let ideas have you is to not have all that pressure of people just throwing their ideas out and you feeling like you have to just pick them up, carry them, and blurt them out to be part of the conversation. That might be helpful. And I'm thinking this up on the fly, so it might be total rubbish too.
No, this is really helpful. Could you maybe talk to us about a couple of the most common types of argument that we will see in apologetics, or maybe even at church on a Sunday? Could you maybe talk to us about how we would recognize a straw man argument?
Yeah.
And what is an ad hominem?
Okay, yeah, there's
Ask what even straw man is. Like that's.
We'll go for it.
Are you going right? I wasn't
Yeah.
sure if you were going to cover that. I'm totally lost.
Okay, so straw man argument is essentially when someone makes a point. I'm trying to think of an example on the fly. I might not be able to, but someone makes a point and you are trying to rebut it. So you're trying to argue against it. And rather than argue against the point they actually made, you argue against a weaker version of it by misrepresenting their argument. So you take what they said and you twist it a little bit and you make it very weak, and then you just attack that thing because it's so easy to attack. So for example, you could say, here's an example of a straw man. You could say that sentences for murder are too long. And the person doing a straw man would say, so you think all murderers shouldn't get prison time?
Okay.
That's the straw man. And you can attack that till the cows come home because it's very easy to attack that. But that's not the point they made.
Yep.
It's related to it, but it's not the point they made. So, and you can usually tell when someone's made a straw man argument because what they'll do is they'll say to you, so you're saying, and they'll then rephrase what you've just said.
Yeah.
And what you need to do yourself at that point is step in and say, no, that's not what I said. Don't let someone misrepresent your point. That's just a little side tip. Don't let someone do that to you, because if you do, then they can just attack an argument that you never made if you become a bit flustered in that scenario. And that's why, anyone that's online, comments come in and you look at that and they make a straw man, and it's usually more subtle than the example I gave. And you can get drawn into feeling bad because they've convinced you made a point that you never actually made, and they're making you feel terrible for it, right? And you can get so upset. You think, oh no, they've ruined my point. And then you stop and you read their argument again. And you go, well, actually, no, they're arguing against something that wasn't said.
Yeah.
So at which point you can just ignore them because they're not contending in reality. They're not arguing with you in the real world. They're making things up and arguing against those. So that's a straw man. Hopefully that's
Thank you. Oh,
helpful.
Absolutely. I love the example. That really helped to clear it up in my mind, because when you said all you said, I'm still thinking, right, I get this. That was a good example.
So a steel man, just really quickly, is the opposite of that. And that's something you should practice. Steel man is kind of what you do when you take someone else's position and try and argue for it, even though you don't believe it. You're trying to make a really strong argument. So, but what a steel man is typically is, say that prison argument, we look at that again. When someone says, I think prison sentences for murder should be are too long, you look at that in the most favorable way possible. Even if you don't necessarily agree with it, you look for reasons why they might be right. And then if they're still wrong, you know that you've given them every possible opportunity and you've been fair. So that's why steel manning is good. So then for ad hominem is quite simple.
And this is the one that I see most often in the world that we exist in here, in the podcasting world, in the comment section and the apologetic section, but also we hear it a lot in church when we are somehow defending our faith, when we talk about other religions especially, or so this one is super common.
Yeah, definitely. And
I must be really sheltered because I've never heard of half of these terms.
Well, so these terms come from the very structured world of critical thinking, right? These are terms that the critical thinking literature gives them. These things exist and they're around us all the time. We just don't always have a name for them. Yeah. And that's what I'm trying to give people in some ways, is pointing out that's what's going on there. And I'm doing it a bit less now. I don't know why. I think my content's just evolved a little bit, but it's still there. It's just not quite as obvious, because that used to be just the entire focus of what I did. And I think it's changed a little bit, which is fine. I'm happy with the changes. So ad hominem, I believe, is Latin for to the man. So it's an argument against the person rather than the argument itself. So say someone was criticizing what I had to say. So I've said that Joseph Smith likely had sex with a 14-year-old girl, right? That one gets people's backs up. a valid argument against that would be, well, I don't think that D&C 132 would have applied to his relationship with Helen Mar Kimball. That's a valid argument against what I've said, because they're looking at my conclusion and they're saying, well, actually, I don't think this evidence works this way. An ad hominem attack is just, well, you have a wonky eye, so you're wrong. That's all it is. Or because of who you are, you can't be right. So, for example, oh, well, you're an ex-Mormon, so what do you know?
Yeah.
We do it in the church with us versus them thinking. That's a form of ad hominem, where we have an in-group, us, members of the church. We have them, and the out-group. Yep. They're bad just because they're not in our group. It's nothing to do with who they are or what they say or the logic of their arguments. They're just wrong because they're not in this group.
Yeah.
So that's another way of ad hominem happening within the church. It happens towards the ex-Mormon community particularly. They're demonized. You can't trust them because of who they are, not because of what they say. That's ad hominem in a nutshell.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that takes me to the one of the big questions that I wanted to ask tonight, and this is probably where I wanted to sort of end up. And it's just really to get your thoughts on this. I have noticed that in the comment sections, that
you read the comments.
Don't tell Alana I read the comments sometimes. That people seem to be really united around, why haven't you left the church? So is there a sinister reason why you're there? Because wouldn't it be more in line with your integrity to just walk away if it's so bad? Or active members of the church who can just discount whatever you're saying because you're a critic and think that you should. But what really unifies it is this idea of, why hasn't church discipline happened yet? And people seem really, really, really upset about that. Could you maybe speak to that?
The
ex-Mormon and Mormon world is united in their confusion.
To kick me out.
I think it's just because so many other people have. Like, I think someone said in the comments earlier, I think it's because you don't speak out to try and get people to leave the church. But I've known other people who've been excommunicated who haven't necessarily been out their way and said, leave the church, but just because of the platform. So it's like, I'm trying to see the same thing. Like, why are they being kicked out? But yet, not that you're necessarily saying, leave the church, people, I'm just shocked by it more than anything, because I thought, like, for sure, like, you would have been kicked out.
I'm talking about, real irritation or real frustration, real anger about this. Why hasn't the church done? So there's frustration at the church because this has got to happen, surely. And frustration at you about your intentions then. So could you speak to that?
Sure. There's one person told me they were going to contact their state president. I was like, okay. What's
try and get you kicked out?
Yeah. I was like, what's that going to achieve? Oh, dear. It's a complicated one.
How uncomfortable are you making that person that they really need to go and speak to their state president?
Yeah, I'm really ruffling some feathers, and it shows just how uncomfortable we are with differing points of view, and it's a case study in that.
I think in saying that, though, I mean, you're on the radar. You absolutely are. There's no way that you're doing what you're doing and you're not on, what's that thing called?
It's the Strengthening Church Members Committee.
You're guaranteed it's flagged. So really, if there was any real, it would have been done by now. So in my opinion, you've not crossed that line yet, in my opinion.
Whatever that line is. Absolutely. I don't know what it is.
I think it changes a lot.
Well, if I were to use my newly found critical thinking skills, I would point out that we have zero evidence to back that up. So
there you go. That's critical thinking 101.
I know, but I just can't imagine that it wouldn't be, especially if you're saying people are saying, I'm contacting my state president.
Okay. A couple of things that have happened recently. So every time I make a video that's a little bit more, not antagonistic, but a little bit more blunt, someone comes out and says, this is the video that'll get you. I've got a close friend in particular. I told him about the Russell M. Nelson video, right? So I did a video that documents the fact that Russell M. Nelson has lied to members of the church. What you want to do with the fact he's lied, totally up to you. But it's there. He said, that's the one that's going to get you kicked out. That'll be it. Nothing. Done one on Jeffrey Holland. He was like, that's the one that'll get kicked out. The mock interview with the Prophet Joseph Smith. Everyone said, that's the line. You've crossed the line there.
Really?
Yeah, that's it.
I'm going to just jump in and do a shout out for that. That was one of the funniest things I have ever seen, ever. We're going to be watching that on Christmas afternoon.
At first I was sitting like,
it was
what is it? Because it was freaky at first, but then the more it went on, I'm like, this is flipping right. Me and Jane are messaging each other, like, and I'm thinking, if Jane, who's an active church member, can see the funny side to this, what is wrong with people in the world?
Yeah, it was irreverent a little bit, but
it was irreverent, but it was.
But surely you've got to have a sense of humour, right?
Yeah.
I think it was all. There was nothing sort of sinister, no plot to overthrow the church. It was just funny.
And we didn't misrepresent Joseph. We talked very factually about his life.
Absolutely. Do you want to? So just for our audience who haven't seen that, Nemo does a temple recommend interview. Sits down for a temple recommend interview with the Prophet Joseph Smith, and
raised him from the dead.
It was golden, so I highly recommend.
Thank you.
So that was controversial.
So that was that. So everyone thought that was the line, right? And it just doesn't seem to be. I've just done a video this conference weekend where I encourage people, if they have issue with the current church leadership, to vote opposed. Not encouraging them to leave.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm just saying, guys, remember, we do have a voice here. It can be very easy to believe in the church that we don't, and that these things will always just carry on without us. But if enough people actually come out and say, no, I oppose, I'm not happy with the way the church is going, then we can do something about it, in theory. One person so I wrote a pro forma letter. So all you had to do was put your name at the top, the name of your state president at the top, your name at the bottom, and you could send it, because I'd listed the scriptural case for why Russell M. Nelson shouldn't be the prophet, really. So I put that out, and that's another long discussion. But one person sent it to their state president. Their state president came back to them 2 hours later and said, you can either resign or we're having a church court for you in 2 days. That was it. That was what they got back from their state president.
Oh, wow.
I've been doing all this. Not a dicky bird. Nothing. I talked to my bishop about it. My bishop's like, nah, it's fine. You carry on, right? And my state president's ignoring me when it comes to my opposing vote, and I'm going to send him another one from this conference because he ignored my last one. He ignored it when we got to the point of saying, well, what is the purpose of it? But anyway, so I've been doing all this and nothing's happened. This chap sent a letter to his state president saying, I oppose the current prophet, and he was threatened with excommunication. So as Doug Vincent's put in the comments, Alana, stick
I was
it
just
up.
about to say that.
Leader roulette. That's what it is.
Yeah, I was thinking that when you were speaking.
I mean, I don't want to dox my state president, but at the same time, I'm kind of just tempted to stick his email in the comments so that those people that are truly angry and want to let him know how much what I do offends them deeply, they can just tell him, because, they need an outlet, clearly, these people.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's causing, they really are genuinely anxious, stressed, angry. I mean, the genuine big feelings.
Because my existence within the church paradigm makes them uncomfortable. The fact that my views can exist within their world makes them very uncomfortable, and rightly so. I don't
get? Why do they watch? If it so deeply offends them and they can't handle watching it, why are you watching? I can't understand that.
Why do you look at a car crash when you drive past? It's just sickly fascinating. They think it's horrific, but they want to look at it anyway.
There is also the sort of element of, when church members are asked to defend the truth and take it seriously as part of their as part of their temple covenants to to a certain extent. This is why it's okay in their world to get personal, because they see it as a very personal thing. And while I feel stimulated and excited, and I see the possibilities that can happen in a church
Mhm.
where we have the Nemos, the Peter Bleakleys, the John DeLynns, the Alana who, doesn't want to go on a Sunday, who may show up at Christmas, who knows? And, where you can have all of these, you don't have to, don't worry. Where we can have these wildly different views and not be threatened by it. The church is most certainly, will exist as an institution with or without you. You're not, we don't have that much power. We can certainly influence in our spheres, but it really saddens me that we're missing out on these possibilities for a really exciting, vibrant church. If we are so determined to,
Sorry, did I answer your question there? Just to make sure I did.
I don't know, audience, do you feel like, why haven't you been kicked out has been answered? I suppose we'll never know. Do you think your stake president will come on and explain himself?
Well, my stake president is ignoring me because we got to the point where I basically said to him, you don't think there's a problem, but you're not addressing my concerns. You're not telling me either whether my concerns are incorrect and that my logic is faulty and I've come to incorrect conclusions, or whether the behavior I've outlined is acceptable for the profit of the church to be engaging in. That, I know that puts him in a really tough position, but that is the question we have to answer, because we have proof that the prophet is doing things he shouldn't be doing. So either that is acceptable or we're wrong. And I don't like false binaries, which is saying there's only two options when there are multiple ones, but that kind of is where we are. You could maybe put some nuance into it, but essentially it kind of boils down to either it's acceptable for them to be doing that, which that does seem to be the answer, that it is acceptable for them to act that way, despite scriptural mandate to say they shouldn't. They seem to be allowed to act that way, but they've got to have the stones to come out and say it. They've got to say, well, no, these are the rules now. So why I haven't been kicked out, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm pretty sure I was almost kicked out of my last stake, and they moved my records so that they wouldn't have to, because that was my home stake and the people there I was very fond of, and we had good personal relationships. And I don't think they wanted to do that. So I'd just moved, and they'd initially agreed to keep my records there, and they very quickly shifted them to Oxford. Oxford refused to take them for 6 months until I forced the issue and said, no, guys, I need my records to be somewhere.
Which is very unusual, because usually when you move, it has to happen very quickly. Your records on there moved so quickly. So that kind of flags up something there.
And they won't give me a calling. I have good conversations with my bishop. They wouldn't give me a temple recommend last time I went. I've discussed that on my channel. But yeah, so why I haven't been excommunicated, I don't know. I honestly don't know why I haven't. And it's not something I'm seeking for, No,
absolutely.
But it's just, I'm as puzzled as everyone else as to why they haven't. I can think of some reasons, but ultimately I don't know why they've let me.
I mean, you're calling the prophet out as a liar alone is enough to have you excommunicated.
You would think, wouldn't you?
Well, according to what they say, you're speaking out against church leaders, and that's one of the common things that people are excommunicated for.
Yeah. And encouraging others to oppose if they feel like it. Sorry, Jane. Go on.
No. Where do you go from here then? What have you got planned? What would you like to happen?
I've got a petition that's currently kind of building a little bit of mass, which is to allow the members of the church to donate their money directly to charity causes and not to the church's coffers, because that would unleash several $1 billion worth of money into the charitable sector across the world. And if managed correctly, that could do a lot to help a lot of people. So there's that. I am continuing to experiment with what exactly an opposing vote means and what it does, and I'll continue to document that. The church will keep saying crazy things, and I'll keep having to talk about it and say, guys, this is bonkers. The idea that the early saints were persecuted because of their abolitionist views is just insane. But that's what people are being told, so we have to talk about it. my hope is that I would become redundant. That would be my hope, because the moment the church becomes 100% truthful with its members, I do kind of become redundant in some senses. If I could become redundant from that part and just run a course on how to think critically or whatever, then I'd happily do that. But we're not there yet by any means, and certainly for the next few years, this is where I can
I was going
sit.
to say, I don't think you'll be redundant for quite some time.
Yeah. If I'm excommunicated, what does that mean for my channel? I have no idea. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. I can't record the meeting like others do because of UK privacy laws. Not that I necessarily want to anyway. It would be a pretty low-key affair, probably. I don't know. May never happen. I may be allowed to just continue to sit within the church and say what I want. Which
Who knows?
It's my hope that it won't come to that. I would love to see. I think especially when recently we have had concerns about again with the church and academics. My hope is that a guy living in Oxford, doing what you do, of course you're going to have a sort of certain perspective or way of thinking, and I see the benefits of it, but my hope is that you'll be able to keep doing what you're doing, and because it's great. Are there any final thoughts that I'll come to Alana first? Anything that you would like to share as we wrap up?
Nah, nothing interesting tonight.
Okay. Nemo, is there anything that you'd like to share as we get ready to head out?
It sounds cheesy, but just be kind to each other in all this. Like we're all trying to get through growing up. A lot of us growing up in an environment that made us think one thing was very definitely true, and we're now discovering that it wasn't what we were taught. I think, as I said at Sunstone, the fact that the church isn't what we were taught it was is, I think, beyond reproach now. We have to admit that there was deception, things weren't always transparent, and that is difficult for some people more than others, and we have to be kind to each other as we go through that. It's why I'm never mean to anyone as an individual. I think the worst thing I've done is call some of the apostles prophet butt kissers, which is a phrase Doug Vincent coined, because at this last general conference, it was just a proper love fest for Russell M. Nelson. It got a bit ridiculous, the amount of people that were just quoting him all the time. It just, it felt like they were worshipping false idols almost. It was, starting to get a little bit apostate in that sense. So,
and that's happening. And then the letters PBK are flying about the comment section of your videos, and so I feel like we witnessed the birth of a moment there.
I think so. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Doug.
You're very welcome. Yeah, thank you, Doug. Yeah,
awesome.
It's the new TBM is PBK.
Love it. PBK. Okay. Have I missed something?
Prophet butt kisser.
Oh, okay. I'm like, I couldn't think what that was there. I was like, what?
Yeah. There you go.
So, Alana, have we got anything planned? Anything?
I don't think so.
We'll prepare to see you all next week and things. And if you want to get in touch, if you have questions for Nemo or for his state president, indeed, if you would like to, we'll put some show notes with the book that you mentioned, your petitions, how to vote opposed, if that's something that you're interested in, and we'll link to that excellent video that you did with.
And I think
Joseph Smith.
One thing I will say is we're always looking for people to come on the podcast. So if it's something that you feel you would like to have a chat with us, then just contact either myself or Jane or the 21st Century Saints Facebook page. And we're always open to having new guests.
Yeah, we're especially looking for bloggers too. We are just about to launch the website in the next couple of days. So
exciting.
If there's anything that you would like to say, we would love to amplify your voice. So in the meantime, we will head out and we will catch up with you next week. We'll put all the links in the show notes. Don't forget, you can find Nemo over on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram,
That's it.
and all
I'm an
those
old
good
man.
places.
That's it.
Yeah. Come find TikTok.
If you're old, I must be ancient.
I'm an old man inside. Everyone keeps telling me to get on TikTok. I don't think it'll work.
I doubted it too, and yeah, honestly, kiss goodbye to your life when you start down that road. And as for us, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next week.
that.
Thanks for joining us.
There is.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.